She smiled that perfect hostess smile and said the words like she was discussing the weather forecast. Actually, Margaret, we've decided to keep Easter intimate this year. Just immediate family. I nodded politely, gathered my purse, and walked to my car without causing a scene. What she didn't realize was that by tomorrow morning, their beautiful colonial house would be completely unprotected against floods, fires, and financial ruin. Because for 3 years, I'd been quietly paying their property insurance premium every month, and she'd just given me the perfect reason to stop. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The whole mess started 18 months ago when my son Daniel called me with excitement bubbling in his voice like he'd just won the lottery. "Mom, we found it," he said. "The perfect house. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, corner lot in Maple Heights. It's everything we dreamed of." I could hear the hope in his voice, the kind of hope that comes when young couples finally see their future taking shape in brick and mortar. Daniel had been my miracle baby, born when I was 42 and had already given up on having children. His father, Robert, passed away when Daniel was only 15, leaving me to raise him alone through those crucial teenage years. I worked double shifts at the regional hospital, first as a nurse's aide, then eventually working my way up to administrative coordinator. Every penny I earned went toward Daniel's education, his soccer cleats, his college tuition, his future. When he graduated with his accounting degree and landed a solid job at Morrison Associates, I felt like every sacrifice had been worth it. That's when he met Cassandra. She worked in marketing for a tech startup downtown, drove a leased BMW, and had opinions about everything from organic produce to vacation destinations. The first time Daniel brought her home for dinner, she spent 20 minutes rearranging my dining room table because the placemats didn't complement the centerpiece properly. She wasn't mean about it, just very sure that her way was better. I bit my tongue and smiled, telling myself that young people had different standards these days. They'd been dating for 8 months when Daniel called about the house. The excitement in his voice was infectious, and I found myself grinning as he described the granite countertops, the master suite with the walk-in closet, the finished basement where he could set up his home office. "There's just one problem," he said, and his voice dropped. "We're about $8,000 short for the down payment. The seller won't budge on price, and our loan officer says we need at least 20% down to avoid PMI. I didn't hesitate. Not for a second. "I'll transfer it today," I told him. "Consider it an early wedding gift." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. "Mom, I can't ask you to do that. That's your retirement money." But it wasn't really a question, and we both knew it. I'd been living in the same modest 2-bedroom apartment for 12 years, driving the same Honda Civic, clipping coupons and cooking meals at home. My retirement account was healthy enough to spare $8,000 for my son's happiness. The closing went smoothly, and I'll never forget the photos Daniel sent me from their first night in the house. Him and Cassandra sitting on boxes in their empty living room, holding champagne flutes and grinning like teenagers. The caption read, "Home sweet home, thanks to the best mom in the world." I printed that photo and put it on my refrigerator, right next to Daniel's high school graduation picture. For the first few months, everything was perfect. They invited me over for dinner every other Sunday, and Cassandra would show me the improvements they were making. New light fixtures in the kitchen, a garden bed she was planning for the backyard, paint samples taped to the living room wall. She had excellent taste, I had to admit. The house was slowly transforming into something that belonged in a home decorating magazine. That's when I made what I thought was a helpful suggestion. During one of our Sunday dinners, Cassandra mentioned how overwhelmed they were with all the new homeowner expenses, property taxes, utilities, maintenance costs, lawn care equipment. "It's like every week there's something new we need to buy," she sighed, pushing her pasta around her plate. I had no idea owning a house was so expensive. I'd been thinking about this exact conversation for weeks. After Robert died, I'd learned the hard way how many financial responsibilities can catch you off guard when you're young and inexperienced. Insurance premiums, in particular, were something that could sneak up on new homeowners. "What's your property insurance running you?" I asked casually. Daniel and Cassandra exchanged a look. "Honestly, we haven't really shopped around yet," Daniel admitted. "We just went with whatever the mortgage company recommended. I think it's around $300 a month." He said it like a question, clearly uncertain about the actual amount. $300 a month was steep for a house their size in that neighborhood. I'd done my research after they bought the place, curious about property values in Maple Heights. "That seems high," I said gently. "Would you like me to help you find something more affordable? I have a good relationship with my insurance agent. She might be able to get you a better rate." Cassandra perked up immediately. "That would be amazing, Margaret. We could definitely use the savings." She was always more enthusiastic about financial help than Daniel, who inherited his father's stubborn streak about accepting assistance. But $300 a month was real money for newlyweds trying to establish themselves, and I could see the relief in both their faces. The next week, I called my insurance agent, Patricia Wells, who'd been handling my policies for over 15 years. Patricia was thorough, honest, and had saved me considerable money over the years by finding discounts and adjusting coverage as my needs changed. "Let me run some numbers on that address," she said when I explained the situation. "A colonial in Maple Heights, built in 1998, no flood zone issues. I should be able to do much better than $300 a month." She called me back the next day with good news. "I can get them comprehensive coverage for $185 a month," she said. "That includes flood protection, which a lot of basic policies don't cover. The savings would be significant." When I relayed this information to Daniel and Cassandra, they were thrilled. Cassandra actually hugged me, which was unusual for her. She wasn't typically the physically affectionate type. Here's where I made the decision that would change everything, though I didn't realize it at the time. When Patricia asked how they wanted to handle the payment setup, I volunteered to add it to my existing auto-pay arrangement. "It'll be simpler," I explained to Daniel. "You can just reimburse me monthly, and this way you don't have to worry about setting up another automatic payment." What I was really thinking was that it would give me peace of mind, knowing their house was properly protected even if they forgot a payment or had a tight month financially. Daniel protested initially, but Cassandra quickly agreed. "That's actually perfect," she said. "One less bill for us to track." We arranged that they'd transfer me $185 on the first of each month, and I'd handle the insurance company directly. Patricia set up the policy with me as the account holder, since I was the one paying, with Daniel and Cassandra listed as additional insureds and the mortgagee properly noted. For the first 6 months, the system worked flawlessly. They transferred the money like clockwork, always with a text message thanking me for handling it. "Insurance paid, you're the best." Or, "Transferred, thanks for making this so easy." Small things, but they made me feel appreciated and useful. I liked being part of their financial stability, contributing to their success as homeowners. The trouble started last summer when Cassandra's sister moved to town. Victoria was 2 years younger than Cassandra, recently divorced, and had very specific opinions about family boundaries. She stayed with Daniel and Cassandra for 3 weeks while apartment hunting, and I could sense the shift in dynamics immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Suddenly, my Sunday dinner invitations became more sporadic. When I did visit, Victoria would make pointed comments about how independent she was, how she'd never let her mother pay for anything because it created unhealthy dependencies. "I think it's so important for couples to handle their own finances," she announced one evening while we were clearing dishes. "It keeps relationships cleaner, you know. Less complicated." She looked directly at me when she said it, making her meaning crystal clear. I smiled politely and changed the subject, but I could see Cassandra absorbing every word. The monthly insurance transfers continued without interruption, but other things began to change. My Sunday dinners were reduced to every third weekend, then once a month. When I called to chat with Daniel, Cassandra would often answer and explain that he was busy with work, or at the gym, or handling household projects. She was never rude about it, just efficiently deflective. "I'll tell him you called," she'd say brightly. "He'll call you back when he gets a chance." He usually did call back, but the conversations felt different. Shorter, more distracted. When I asked about their plans or shared news about my own life, he'd give brief responses and quickly pivot to wrapping up the call. "I should go help Cassandra with dinner," or "We've got an early morning tomorrow." Valid reasons, but the warmth that had always existed between us seemed to be cooling degrees at a time. The first time they forgot to transfer the insurance money, I didn't think much of it. It was February, and I knew they'd just taken a vacation. To Florida, that had probably stretched their budget. I paid the premium from my own account and sent Daniel a gentle reminder text. "Hey, honey, just a heads up that the insurance payment went through. No rush, but whenever you get a chance to transfer, it would be great." He responded within an hour with an apology and immediately sent the money. The second time it happened was in April, and this time the oversight lasted 4 days. I had to cover the premium again and send a more direct message. "Daniel, the insurance payment is due and I haven't received your transfer yet. Can you please send it today?" His response was brief. "Sorry, forgot. Sending now." No explanation, no acknowledgement that I'd had to cover for them twice now. That's when I started paying closer attention to their social media posts. Cassandra's Instagram was a carefully curated showcase of their lifestyle. Dinner out at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, new furniture for the house, a designer handbag she'd been saving up for. Meanwhile, I was floating their insurance payments and getting treated like a bill collector when I asked for reimbursement. The third missed payment came in early June, and this time I was genuinely frustrated. I'd covered their premium for 5 days before Daniel finally responded to my text. "Things are tight this month," he wrote. "Can you spot us until the 15th? No apology, no acknowledgement that this was becoming a pattern. Just an assumption that I'd continue enabling their carelessness. I spotted them until the 15th, and then until the 22nd when the money actually arrived. By then, I was beginning to understand that they'd stopped viewing the insurance as their responsibility. In their minds, it had become my contribution to their household, my way of helping them save money each month. They weren't forgetting to pay me back. They were simply taking advantage of my willingness to cover for them. The realization stung, more than I'd expected. These weren't malicious people. Daniel was still my loving son, and Cassandra wasn't intentionally cruel. They'd just gradually shifted their perspective until my financial contribution felt like an entitlement rather than a favor. The monthly insurance payment had become part of their budget calculations, money they could spend elsewhere because Mom would handle it. Summer passed with increasing delays and increasingly casual attitudes about reimbursement. July's payment was 6 days late. August took 2 weeks and required 3 reminder texts. September stretched to nearly 3 weeks, and when the money finally arrived, there was no accompanying message at all. Just a silent transfer, like paying a utility bill. By October, I was seriously considering whether to continue the arrangement. The insurance policy was in my name, so I had every legal right to cancel it if I chose. But the thought of leaving their house unprotected felt wrong, even if they were taking advantage of my generosity. What if something happened? What if there was a fire or a flood, and they lost everything because I'd let my hurt feelings override my protective instincts? I decided to have a conversation with Daniel about it. Not confrontational, just honest. I called him on a Saturday morning when I knew he'd be home and relaxed. "Hi, honey. I said when he answered. Do you have a few minutes to talk? His voice was warm and familiar, the way it used to be all the time. Of course, Mom. What's up? I explained my concerns gently, focusing on the logistics rather than my hurt feelings. The insurance arrangement isn't working as smoothly as we'd hoped, I said. The payments have been getting later and later, and I'm having to cover the premiums more often than not. Maybe it would be better if you set up direct payment with the insurance company. There was a pause. Then Daniel sighed. Mom, I appreciate everything you do, but honestly, things are really tight right now. Cassandra's been wanting to redo the master bathroom, and we're trying to save for that. The insurance thing has been really helpful for our budget. Can't we just keep it the way it is? The casual dismissal in his voice was like a slap. He wasn't even pretending to take my concerns seriously. Daniel, I'm not running a charity here, I said, more sharply than I'd intended. I'm happy to help you out, but you need to hold up your end of the agreement. I know, he said. Quickly. We'll be better about it, I promise. Things will settle down after the holidays. The holidays. It was October, and he was already making excuses for December. I could see exactly where this was heading. More delays, more casual assumptions, more of my retirement money subsidizing their lifestyle improvements. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that photo of them in their empty living room on their first night in the house. They looked so happy, so grateful, so full of plans and dreams. When had that gratitude curdled into entitlement? When had my help become an expectation rather than a gift? The November payment never came at all. I sent reminder texts that were ignored. I called Daniel twice and got voicemail both times. Finally, I called the house phone, something I rarely did because Cassandra usually answered. Oh, hi, Margaret, she said when she picked up. Daniel's at a work event tonight. Can I take a message? Actually, I wanted to talk to both of you, I said, about the insurance payment for November. I haven't received it yet, and the premium already went through on my account. There was a brief silence. Oh, that, Cassandra said, and I could hear something shift in her tone. We've been meaning to talk to you about that. We're going to need to skip this month. Daniel's company is restructuring, and we want to keep our cash reserves higher until we know how that's going to affect his position. I felt my jaw clench. Cassandra, you can't just decide to skip insurance payments. That's not how insurance works. She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. Well, no. Obviously, we're not skipping insurance. You're just going to cover it this month, like you have been. We'll catch up when things stabilize. Like I have been. She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, as if covering their responsibilities had always been the arrangement. That's not what we agreed to, I said carefully. The agreement was that you'd reimburse me monthly. That hasn't been happening. Margaret, I think you're being a little dramatic, Cassandra said, and now her voice had an edge to it. You offered to help us, remember? We didn't ask you to take this on. If it's become a burden for you, maybe we should look into other options. The gaslighting was breathtaking. She was rewriting history in real time, making me the unreasonable one for expecting them to keep their word. Other options sound like a good idea, I said evenly. Why don't you call some insurance companies this week and get quotes for direct payment? Fine, she said curtly. We'll handle it ourselves from now on. The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone, stunned by the casual cruelty of the conversation. In Cassandra's mind, I'd become the problem. Not their failure to pay, not their months of broken promises, but my expectation that they'd honor our agreement. Somehow, I'd become the unreasonable party in this situation. Daniel called me back an hour later. Mom, Cassandra told me you two had words about the insurance thing. His tone was careful, diplomatic. I think there might have been a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? I asked. Well, she said you seemed upset about covering the payments. But Mom, you volunteered to handle this. We thought you wanted to help us out. There it was again, the reframing, the subtle shift that made my generosity the source of the problem. I did want to help, I said slowly, by getting you a better rate and handling the administrative side, not by paying your bills indefinitely. Daniel was quiet for a moment. It's just been a rough year financially, he said finally. I thought you understood that. I understand that you're adults with jobs and a mortgage, I replied. I understand that insurance is a basic homeowner responsibility. What I don't understand is when my help became your entitlement. The conversation ended badly, with Daniel defensive and me feeling like the villain for expecting basic accountability. We didn't speak for 2 weeks after that, the longest silence we'd ever had. When he finally called, it was to extend a peace offering. Why don't you come over for dinner Sunday? He suggested. Cassandra's making her famous lasagna. We can talk everything through. I agreed, hoping we could find our way back to the easy relationship we'd always had. I brought a bottle of wine and a small centerpiece I'd picked up at the farmer's market, the kind of hostess gifts I'd always brought to their home. Cassandra greeted me at the door with a bright smile and a hug that felt genuine. Dinner was pleasant, comfortable even. We talked about Daniel's work, my book club, their plans for the holidays. No one mentioned insurance, late payments, or our recent disagreements. For 2 hours, we felt like family again. I helped with the dishes while Daniel built a fire in the living room, and we ended the evening playing board games like we used to when Daniel was young. Walking to my car that night, I felt hopeful that we'd turned a corner. Maybe the stress of homeownership had gotten to them more than I'd realized. Maybe they'd needed time to adjust to the responsibilities and were ready to handle things more maturely now. Maybe we could go back to the monthly reimbursement system with better communication and clearer expectations. I was wrong. December's payment never came, and this time my texts weren't even acknowledged. When I called, Daniel would promise to take care of it soon, but never did. By the end of December, they owed me for 2 full months of premiums, nearly $400. I'd covered their insurance for 60 days without receiving a penny or even a genuine apology. That's when I started thinking seriously about canceling the policy. Not out of spite, but out of simple self-preservation. I was living on a fixed income, and $400 wasn't pocket change for me. If they wanted to treat me like their personal bank, they needed to understand that banks have terms and conditions. But I didn't cancel it. Not yet. Because even though I was hurt and frustrated, I couldn't quite bring myself to leave their house unprotected. What if something happened during the gap between my cancellation and their new policy activation? What if they delayed getting new coverage, the way they delayed everything else? I couldn't live with the possibility that their procrastination might lead to financial disaster. So I covered January's premium too, making it 3 months in a row. I sent one final text to Daniel. I've now paid 3 months of your insurance premiums without reimbursement. This arrangement is no longer working for me. Please get your own policy by March 1st, because I'll be canceling this one. His response came 6 hours later. Got it. Thanks for the heads up. Thanks for the heads up. Like I was reminding him about a dentist appointment, not informing him that I was done subsidizing his financial irresponsibility. The casual dismissal was almost worse than outright rudeness. At least rudeness would have acknowledged that this mattered. February passed without any mention of insurance shopping or new policies. When I asked Daniel about it during one of our brief phone conversations, he said they were still looking into options and asked if I could maybe cover them for 1 more month while they figured things out. The audacity was stunning. They'd now missed 4 months of payments, owed me over $700, and still expected me to extend their deadline. No, I said firmly. March 1st is the deadline. Figure it out. Daniel's voice turned cold. Fine, Mom. We'll figure it out. We hung up without saying goodbye. That brings us to Easter week, and the conversation that changed everything. Cassandra called me on Tuesday evening, her voice bright and cheerful like nothing had happened. "Hi, Margaret. I hope you're having a good week. I wanted to talk to you about Easter plans." My heart lifted despite everything. Easter had always been special for our family. When Daniel was young, I'd host elaborate egg hunts in my apartment complex's courtyard, invite neighbors and friends, make a huge brunch spread. After he grew up, we'd started alternating hosting duties, and last year, Cassandra had outdone herself, with a beautiful tablescape and a ham that was genuinely restaurant quality. "I'd love to help with anything you need," I said eagerly. "Should I bring the deviled eggs like last year? Or I could handle dessert if you prefer." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Actually," Cassandra said, "we've decided to keep things really intimate this year. Just immediate family, you know? My parents are driving up from Georgia, and with my sister Victoria in town, we're already going to be pretty crowded." The words hit me like ice water. Immediate family. Victoria, who'd been in town for all of 3 months and had spent most of that time undermining my relationship with my son, was immediate family. But I, the woman who'd raised Daniel alone, who'd paid for his education, who'd helped them buy their house, who'd been covering their insurance for 4 months, was not. I managed to keep my voice steady. "Of course," I said. "I understand completely. You'll have a lovely time." Cassandra's relief was audible. "Oh, good. I was worried you might be disappointed. But you know how it is with space constraints and everything." Space constraints. In the house I'd helped them buy, around the table. I'd helped them afford, talking to the woman who couldn't be bothered to pay me back $700. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. Not even hurt, though that was certainly there. What I felt was clarity. Crystal clear understanding of exactly where I stood in their lives and exactly what I needed to do about it. I walked to my desk, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through my contacts until I found Patricia Wells's number. It was 8:30 on a Tuesday night, but Patricia had always told her clients to call if they had urgent concerns. This, I decided, qualified. "Patricia," I said when she answered, "it's Margaret Dawson. I need to cancel the property insurance policy on 847 Maple Heights Drive, effective immediately." Patricia answered on the third ring, her voice professional despite the late hour. "Margaret, what can I do for you?" I'd been dreading this conversation all week, but Cassandra's dismissal had crystallized my resolve. "I need to cancel the property insurance policy we set up for my son's house," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The one on Maple Heights Drive." There was a brief pause. "Of course. Can I ask if there's a particular reason? Are they switching to another company?" Patricia had handled my insurance needs for years and knew this wasn't a decision I'd make lightly. "They're no longer reimbursing me for the premiums," I explained simply. "The arrangement isn't working out." Patricia's tone shifted slightly, becoming more careful. "I see. Well, as the policyholder, you have every right to cancel. I'll need to give you the standard notices about coverage gaps and liability, but if you're certain about this decision, I can process the cancellation immediately." She paused. "Margaret, I have to ask, do they know you're planning to cancel?" The question hung in the air between us. "Not yet," I admitted. "But they've had months to make other arrangements. I gave them a March 1st deadline, and they've ignored it." Patricia was quiet for a moment, probably calculating the implications. "All right, I'm required to inform you that canceling their coverage will leave the property unprotected against damage, theft, and liability claims. It will also likely violate their mortgage terms, since lenders require continuous coverage. I'd already considered these consequences." "I understand," I said. "How quickly will the cancellation take effect?" Patricia clicked through what sounded like computer screens. "I can process it tonight with an effective date of tomorrow morning. The mortgage company will be notified automatically within 24 hours. Do you want me to proceed? My finger hovered over the end call button for just a moment. This felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Once their insurance was canceled, there would be no pretending this was just a family disagreement that could be smoothed over with apologies and promises to do better. This was a declaration that I was done being taken advantage of. Yes, I said firmly. Please proceed with the cancellation. Patricia's fingers clicked across her keyboard. Done. You'll receive a confirmation email within the hour, and any unused premium will be refunded to your account within 5 business days. She hesitated. Margaret, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but in 30 years of doing this job, I've seen this situation more times than I care to count. Family members helping with insurance, then getting stuck with the bills when things go sideways. You're making the right decision. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window at the parking lot below. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not happiness, exactly, but relief. The weight of constantly worrying about their next missed payment, their next casual excuse, their next assumption that I'd just handle it, was finally lifting from my shoulders. My phone buzzed with Patricia's confirmation email. The policy was officially canceled as of 12:01 a.m. Thursday morning. In less than 4 hours, Daniel and Cassandra's house would be completely unprotected, and they had no idea it was coming. Part of me felt guilty about the surprise, but a larger part remembered how they'd handled every conversation about this topic. They'd had months of warnings, months of chances to take responsibility, months to treat me with basic respect and consideration. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. No anxiety about upcoming payment deadlines, no frustration about unreturned phone calls, no resentment about being treated like an ATM instead of a family member. Just quiet, restful sleep in my own space, with my own responsibilities properly handled and my own boundaries finally established. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical April weather that couldn't decide between winter and spring. I made my usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, checked my email, and settled in with the newspaper crossword puzzle. The normalcy of the routine felt foreign after months of insurance-related stress, but pleasantly so. This was what retirement was supposed to feel like: peaceful, unhurried, free from other people's drama and financial irresponsibility. My phone stayed silent all morning, which didn't surprise me. Even when their insurance company sent automated notifications, they typically went to the email address Daniel had provided during the application process, which he checked sporadically at best. The mortgage company's notification would probably take another day or two to generate, and even then it would likely arrive as a form letter that might get overlooked among their other mail. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, something I'd been neglecting while dealing with their insurance drama. It felt good to focus on my own space, my own needs, my own priorities for a change. I organized my kitchen cabinets, dusted the living room furniture, and finally hung the new curtains I'd bought 3 weeks ago, but hadn't found the motivation to install. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store to pick up ingredients for the Easter dinner I'd now be eating alone. Not a sad, pathetic meal, but something I'd genuinely enjoy. Fresh salmon, asparagus, those fancy dinner rolls from the bakery section, and a small chocolate cake that would last me several days. I'd set my table with the good china, light a candle, and celebrate Easter exactly the way I wanted to, without walking on eggshells around anyone's mood or opinions. The grocery store was busy with other people doing their Easter shopping, families with children picking out candy and flowers, couples debating between ham and turkey. I watched them with a detached sort of interest, remembering when Daniel was young and we'd spend an hour in the candy aisle letting him choose exactly the right chocolate bunny. Those days felt like a different lifetime now, when his excitement was genuine and his gratitude was automatic. My phone rang while I was waiting in the checkout line. Unknown number, which usually meant telemarketers, but something made me answer. Mrs. Dawson? The voice was professional, businesslike. This is Mark Hendricks from First National Mortgage. I'm calling about the property at 847 Maple Heights Drive. Our records show that the insurance policy on this property has been canceled, which puts the loan in violation of the mortgage terms. I felt a little flutter of surprise. The notification had happened faster than Patricia predicted. Yes, I said carefully. I canceled the policy yesterday evening. Mark's tone became more urgent. Mrs. Dawson, I'm not sure if you're aware, but continuous insurance coverage is a requirement of the mortgage agreement. The borrowers have 10 days to provide proof of replacement coverage, or will be forced to place force-placed insurance on the property, which is significantly more expensive than standard homeowners' policies. I understand, I replied, but I'm no longer responsible for that property's insurance. You'll need to contact the actual homeowners about replacement coverage. There was a pause. Ma'am, according to our records, you're listed as the insurance policy holder. Are you saying you're not affiliated with this property? I'm the mother of one of the borrowers, I explained. I was helping them with their insurance payments as a favor, but that arrangement has ended. They'll need to secure their own coverage. Going forward. Mark's voice took on a more careful tone. I see. Well, I'm required to inform you that if adequate insurance isn't in place within 10 days, the force-placed coverage will cost approximately $800 per month, and that cost will be added to their mortgage payment. $800 per month. I did quick math in my head. That was more than 4 times what I'd been paying for their comprehensive coverage. If Daniel and Cassandra thought $185 a month was too much to reimburse me for, they were going to be absolutely shocked by this alternative. You'll need to contact them directly about that, I told Mark. I don't have any authority over their mortgage or their insurance decisions. We exchanged pleasantries and hung up, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Mortgage companies didn't like gaps in insurance coverage, especially not gaps that lasted longer than a few days. They'd be contacting Daniel and Cassandra very soon, probably by phone and certified mail, making sure there was no ambiguity about the situation. I finished my grocery shopping with a lighter step than I'd had in months. The phone call had confirmed that the wheels were now in motion, that Daniel and Cassandra would soon understand exactly what my help had been worth. Not just the money, though that was significant, but the administrative burden, the relationship, management with the insurance company, the protection against exactly this kind of mortgage company pressure. That afternoon, I prepared my salmon dinner with extra care, setting my small dining table with my mother's china and the cloth napkins I usually saved for special occasions. I poured myself a glass of white wine and sat down to a meal that was entirely my own choice, prepared according to my own preferences, eaten at my own pace without anyone checking their phone or rushing through conversation to get back to their evening plans. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful, restorative. For months, I'd been carrying the stress of their financial irresponsibility, worrying about missed payments and broken promises, feeling guilty for wanting basic consideration and respect. Now, for the first time since this whole arrangement began, their insurance situation was genuinely not my problem. My phone rang again around 6:30, just as I was finishing my cake and considering whether to watch a movie or read before bed. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my stomach tighten slightly. This was it. The conversation I'd been both dreading and anticipating. "Hi, Mom," he said, and his voice sounded strained. "I just got a really weird call from our mortgage company. They said something about our insurance being canceled. I think there might be some kind of mistake." His tone was carefully neutral, like he was hoping this was just a bureaucratic error that could be easily resolved. "There's no mistake," I said calmly. "I canceled the policy yesterday." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if The call had dropped. "Mom?" he said finally. "What do you mean you canceled it? You can't just cancel our insurance without telling us." "Actually, I can," I replied. "The policy was in my name because I was the one paying for it. Since you stopped reimbursing me months ago, I stopped paying for it." My voice remained steady, matter of fact. This wasn't an emotional outburst or a dramatic gesture. It was simply a logical consequence of their choices. "But Mom," Daniel's voice rose slightly, "we can't just not have insurance. The mortgage company is freaking out. They're talking about putting some kind of forced coverage on the house that costs $800 a month." I could hear Cassandra's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. She sounded agitated. "Then you should probably call some insurance companies and get quotes for your own policy," I suggested. "I gave you a March deadline to make other arrangements, and you ignored it. Now you'll need to handle it yourselves." Daniel was quiet for a moment, probably processing the fact that I wasn't going to fix this for them. "Mom, this is really serious," he said, and now there was an edge of panic in his voice. "We can't afford $800 a month for insurance. That would completely blow up our budget." The irony was almost painful. They couldn't afford $800 a month for insurance, but they'd been perfectly comfortable stiffing me for $700 in missed payments. "Most insurance companies can bind coverage over the phone and have policies active within 24 hours, I told him. "If you call first thing tomorrow morning, you should be able to get something in place before the mortgage company's deadline." Cassandra's voice got louder in the background, and I heard Daniel cover the phone to respond to her. When he came back on the line, his tone had shifted. "Mom, look, I know we've been a little behind on the reimbursements, but you can't just leave us hanging like this. We're family. Family doesn't abandon each other over money." The guilt trip was so familiar, so automatic, that I almost found myself apologizing and offering to reinstate the policy. Almost. "You're absolutely right," I said instead. "Family doesn't abandon each other over money. Family also doesn't exploit each other's generosity or take advantage of each other's willingness to help. Family pays their debts and keeps their promises, and treats each other with respect." Daniel was quiet again. "We never asked you to pay our insurance," he said finally, and I could hear Cassandra coaching him in the background. "You volunteered to handle that. If it became too much of a burden, you should have said something sooner." The rewriting of history was breathtaking. They'd gone from grateful beneficiaries to unwilling victims of my interference in the span of a single conversation. "I did say something," I reminded him. "Multiple times. I sent texts, made phone calls, set deadlines. You ignored all of it." Cassandra must have taken the phone then, because suddenly her voice was on the line, sharp and accusatory. "Margaret, I cannot believe you would do something this vindictive. We have Easter guests coming, we have family visiting, and now we have to deal with this insurance crisis because you decided to throw a tantrum. A tantrum. 4 months of missed payments, $700 of unreimbursed premiums, and months of being treated like a bank rather than a family member, and my decision to stop enabling their irresponsibility was a tantrum." "Cassandra," I said, and my voice was ice-cold calm, "you banned me from Easter dinner because I'm not immediate family, so I'm treating you like the strangers you've made it clear you consider me to be. Strangers don't pay each other's bills indefinitely, without compensation." The line went quiet except for muffled conversation between them. Daniel came back on the phone. "Mom, the Easter thing, that wasn't about you not being family. Cassandra's parents are coming and her sister's here, and the space is just tight. It wasn't personal." But it was personal, and we all knew it. Victoria had been included immediately, while I, who had raised Daniel and helped them buy their home, had been politely dismissed. "It felt pretty personal to me," I said. "But that's fine. You wanted space, you wanted independence, you wanted to handle things yourselves. Now you can." The conversation was spiraling toward an argument that wouldn't resolve anything, so I decided to end it. Daniel, I love you, but I'm done being taken advantage of. Call some insurance companies tomorrow and get your own policy. Take care of yourselves. I hung up before he could respond, then immediately turned off my phone. I didn't want to deal with angry callbacks or guilt-laden text messages or Cassandra's inevitable social media posts about ungrateful family members. I'd said what I needed to say, established the boundary I should have established months ago, and now they could handle the consequences of their own choices. The next morning, Friday, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, but I didn't check them. Instead, I made coffee, read the newspaper, and planned my weekend. A trip to the farmer's market, maybe a movie at the discount theater, definitely some time in the community garden plot I'd been neglecting. Around 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Daniel standing in the hallway, holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and looking miserable. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but that felt cowardly. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about this." His hair was disheveled and he had dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept well. "Can I come in? Please?" I stepped aside and let him enter, but I didn't offer coffee or ask him to sit down. This wasn't a social visit. "I called 6 insurance companies this morning," he said without preamble. "The cheapest quote I got was $290 a month, and that's with higher deductibles than what we had before. Most of them want the first month plus a deposit up front." He ran his hand through his hair. "Mom, we don't have $600 sitting around to start a new policy." I leaned against my kitchen counter and waited for him to continue. "The mortgage company called again this morning. They said if we don't have proof of coverage by next Friday, they're going to automatically place the forced coverage and add it to our mortgage payment. $812 a month, Mom. We can't afford that." "So what are you asking me to do about it?" I said quietly. Daniel looked up at me with those same brown eyes that used to melt my heart when he was 7 years old and had broken something valuable. "Could you maybe turn the old policy back on? Just temporarily, until we can save up the money to start our own?" The audacity was stunning. After months of missed payments, after treating me like their personal ATM, after excluding me from their Easter celebration, he was asking me to bail them out again. "No," I said simply. "I'm done with that arrangement." "Mom, please." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "I know we messed up with the payments. I know we should have been more responsible. But we'll pay you back everything we owe, I promise. We just need a little more time." It was the same promise he'd been making for months, the same excuse, the same assumption that my money and my credit would always be available to fix their mistakes. "Daniel," I said gently, "you've had months to figure this out. You've had multiple deadlines, multiple conversations, multiple opportunities to take responsibility. Instead, you chose to treat my help as your entitlement." He was quiet, staring at his hands. "If you don't have $600 for an insurance deposit, that's a budgeting problem you need to solve yourselves." "But what are we supposed to do?" he asked, and his voice sounded young and scared. "We can't afford $800 a month. That would eat up everything we've been saving for the bathroom renovation." The bathroom renovation. They were worried about cosmetic home improvements while owing me $700 and facing a genuine financial crisis. "You could sell the house," I suggested. "Downsize to something more affordable. Use the equity to pay off your debts. And start fresh." Daniel's head snapped up. "Sell the house? Mom, that's our home. We've put so much work into it, so much money. We can't just walk away from that." "Then you'll need to find a way to afford the insurance," I said. "Maybe pick up extra shifts. Maybe cancel some subscriptions. Maybe skip the bathroom renovation and use that money for essentials like insurance." These were basic financial Management concepts. The kind of thing adults figured out when they overextended themselves. Daniel stood up abruptly. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Fine, Mom. We'll figure it out ourselves, but don't expect us to come running. Back when you decide you want to be part of our lives again." The threat was supposed to hurt, supposed to make me reconsider and rush to fix things between us. Instead, I felt only sadness. Sadness that my son had become the kind of person who used emotional manipulation instead of taking responsibility. Sadness that his marriage had turned him into someone who saw my love as a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be cherished. Sadness that we'd reached a point where setting reasonable boundaries was viewed as abandonment. "I'll always want to be part of your life," I told him as he headed toward the door. "But not as your backup bank account. When you're ready to treat me like family instead of like a financial safety net, call me." He paused with his hand on the doorknob, and for a moment I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge that they'd handled this badly. Instead, he said, "Cassandra was right about you," and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if he'd slammed it. I stood in my quiet apartment, holding the grocery store flowers he'd left on my counter, and realized that I felt more relieved than hurt. The rest of Friday passed peacefully. I worked in my garden plot, had lunch with my neighbor Mrs. Chen, and spent the evening reading a mystery novel I'd been saving for a quiet day. My phone stayed off, and I didn't feel the slightest urge to check those missed messages. Whatever drama Daniel and Cassandra were creating, whatever crisis they were manufacturing, whatever guilt trips they were crafting, none of it was my responsibility anymore. Saturday morning brought a knock on my door just after 9 a.m. This time it was Cassandra, looking perfectly put together in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, but with tension lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "Margaret," she said when I opened the door, "we need to discuss this situation like adults." I almost laughed at the irony. Now she wanted to discuss things like adults, after months of treating me like their personal finance department. "What situation is that?" I asked, not inviting her in. Cassandra's smile was strained but determined. "This insurance mix-up. I think there's been some miscommunication about expectations and responsibilities." "There's been no miscommunication," I said. "You stopped paying me back for the premiums, so I stopped paying the premiums. It's actually very straightforward." Cassandra's composure slipped slightly. "Margaret, we never agreed to some rigid payment schedule. You offered to help us, and we assumed there was some flexibility built into that arrangement." The rewriting of history continued. In Cassandra's version, their months of missed payments and ignored deadlines were just natural flexibility within a loose arrangement, not evidence of their disrespect and irresponsibility. "I'm curious," I said. "What made you think there was flexibility? Was it the multiple reminder texts I sent? The phone calls about missed payments? The March deadline I gave you?" Cassandra's jaw tightened. "We've been going through a difficult financial period. Daniel's company has been unstable, and we've had unexpected expenses. I thought family was supposed to support each other during challenging times. There it was again. The assumption that being family meant endless tolerance for their poor choices and lack of consideration. Family does support each other," I agreed. "Family also communicates honestly about problems and treats each other with respect. Family doesn't ignore phone calls and miss payment deadlines for months without explanation." Cassandra shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing that her victim narrative wasn't as convincing as she'd hoped. "Look," she said, dropping the artificial sweetness from her voice. "We both know this is about more than money. You're upset about Easter, and you're taking it out on us financially." Her directness was almost refreshing after months of careful manipulation. "You're punishing us for setting reasonable boundaries about our holiday celebrations." I stared at her for a long moment, amazed by her ability to cast herself as the victim in every scenario. "Cassandra, You excluded me from Easter after I'd spent months subsidizing your lifestyle. You called your sister immediate family while treating me like an outsider. Then you act surprised when I stop providing financial support to people who've made it clear I'm not really part of their family. We never said you weren't part of our family, Cassandra protested, but her voice lacked conviction. We just needed some space to establish our own traditions. That's normal for young couples. Young couples who lived in a house I'd helped them buy, whose insurance I'd been paying, whose financial problems I'd been solving while they focused on bathroom renovations. You're right, I said. You do need space to establish your own traditions. You also need space to handle your own responsibilities. Consider this me giving you all the space you asked for. Cassandra's mask of politeness finally slipped completely. Fine, she snapped. Be petty and vindictive if that makes you feel better. But don't expect us to forgive this when you decide you want a relationship with your future grandchildren. The threat hung in the air between us like a weapon. She was using potential grandchildren as leverage, assuming that my desire to be a grandmother would override my need for basic respect and consideration. The manipulation was so transparent, so calculating, that I felt more pity than anger. Cassandra, I said quietly, if you and Daniel have children, I hope you raise them to honor their commitments and treat people with kindness. I hope you teach them that love isn't a transaction and that family relationships require mutual respect, not just one-sided support. Her face flushed with anger or embarrassment. I couldn't tell which. We'll remember this, she said, turning to leave. We'll remember exactly how you treated us when we needed help. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking angrily against the concrete walkway, and felt only sadness for the relationship that might have been if she'd chosen partnership over manipulation. Sunday passed quietly, and Monday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Patricia from the insurance company, checking in on how everything had played out. Margaret, she said, I wanted to follow up on that cancellation. Have you heard anything from your son about replacement coverage? They're handling it themselves now, I told her, as they should have been all along. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've been in this business long enough to see how these family arrangements usually end. You made the right choice, even though it probably didn't feel good at the time. She was right about that. It hadn't felt good, and it still didn't. There was no satisfaction in watching Daniel and Cassandra struggle with the consequences of their choices, no pleasure in the crisis they now faced. There was only the quiet relief of knowing that I was no longer responsible for fixing problems they'd created through their own selfishness and poor planning. That afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Dawson, this is Victoria, Cassandra's sister. I think you should know that Daniel and Cassandra are telling people you abandoned them during a family crisis. I thought you deserved to know what they're saying. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what Victoria's angle was in sharing this information. I typed back a simple response. Thank you for letting me know. I hope they find a solution that works for everyone. I didn't ask what specifically they were saying or which people they were telling. I didn't defend myself or ask Victoria to set the record straight. The truth was what it was, and the people who mattered would eventually see through their spin. Tuesday brought another knock on my door, but this time it was Mrs. Chen from next door, holding a plate of homemade cookies and wearing a concerned expression. Margaret, dear, she said, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? I saw your son here the other day, and he seemed quite upset when he left. Mrs. Chen was in her 70s, a widow like me, and we'd developed a comfortable friendship over the past few years. She was kind without being nosy, supportive without being intrusive. Family disagreement, I told her simply. Nothing that can't be worked through with time and patience. She nodded knowingly. Family can be the most wonderful and the most difficult thing in our lives, she said. My daughter went through a phase where she thought I was too involved in her decisions. We didn't speak for almost a year. She handed me the plate of cookies. The important thing is to know your own worth and not compromise your values for the sake of temporary peace. Her words stayed with me as I settled in for another quiet evening. Mrs. Chen was right about knowing your own worth. For months, I'd let Daniel and Cassandra's treatment of me erode my sense of what I deserved in a relationship. I'd accepted their excuses, enabled their irresponsibility, and allowed them to reframe my generosity as their entitlement. Wednesday morning brought the news I'd been wondering about. A call from Mark at the mortgage company, following up on the insurance situation. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "I wanted to let you know that we've received proof of insurance coverage for the Maple Heights property. It looks like the borrowers were able to secure a replacement policy." "That's good news," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want Daniel and Cassandra to lose their house or face financial ruin. I just wanted them to handle their own responsibilities without expecting me to subsidize their lifestyle. "Thank you for letting me know." "Actually," Mark continued, "there is one other thing. The borrowers have fallen behind on their mortgage payments as well. Just 1 month so far, but combined with the insurance lapse, it's raised some red flags in our system. I don't suppose you have any insight into their financial situation?" The question caught me off guard. Daniel hadn't mentioned anything about missing mortgage payments, but then again, he'd probably hidden the insurance reimbursement issue from Cassandra for months as well. "I'm not involved in their finances," I told Mark. "You'd need to contact them directly about any payment issues." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen wondering how bad their financial situation really was. Missing mortgage payments was serious business, not the kind of thing that happened to people who were just temporarily short on cash. It suggested deeper problems, more fundamental issues with budgeting and financial management than I'd realized. Part of me wanted to call Daniel and ask about it, maybe offer to help them figure out a budget or connect them with a financial counselor. The old Margaret, the one who'd spent months enabling their irresponsibility, would have jumped in to fix this problem too. But the new Margaret, the one who'd learned the difference between helping and enabling, recognized that this was another situation they needed to handle themselves. If they wanted my advice, they could ask for it. If they wanted my help, they could approach me with respect and honesty instead of manipulation and guilt trips. If they wanted a relationship with me, they could treat me like family instead of like a bank account with convenient emotional attachments. Thursday evening brought the final piece of the puzzle. A Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize, a woman named Jennifer who identified herself as Cassandra's college roommate. "Hi, Mrs. Dawson," the message read. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. Cassandra has been posting some pretty concerning things about a family situation, and I wanted to get the other side of the story before I responded to her request for help." I almost deleted the message without reading further. I had no interest in getting dragged into social media drama or defending myself to strangers. But something about Jennifer's tone made me curious. "What kind of help is she requesting?" I typed back. Jennifer's response came quickly. She started a GoFundMe page asking for donations to help with their housing crisis. She's saying that a family member cut off their insurance without warning, and now they're facing foreclosure. She's asking for $5,000 to cover emergency expenses. The fundraising page. Of course. When personal responsibility failed and family manipulation didn't work, the next step was crowdsourcing sympathy from strangers. "The situation is more complicated than her post suggests," I replied to Jennifer. "But I appreciate you reaching out before contributing. I'd encourage you to ask her some specific questions about how they ended up in this situation before you decide whether to donate." Jennifer's next message showed that she was clearly thinking along the same lines. "I've known Cassandra for 10 years, she wrote. This kind of financial crisis doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen to people who are managing their money responsibly. I suspect there's more to this story than she's sharing." Smart woman. The kind of friend who asked difficult questions instead of just offering unconditional support for bad decisions. I didn't follow up with Jennifer or try to find Cassandra's GoFundMe page. I didn't need to see how they were spinning the story or what lies they were telling to generate sympathy. The truth was what it was, and people who knew them well would eventually see through the victim narrative. Friday arrived with spring sunshine and the kind of crisp air that made everything feel possible. I spent the morning in my garden plot, planting tomatoes and peppers, thinking about how much my life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been stressed about their missed payments, worried about their financial situation, carrying the burden of their irresponsibility like it was my own. Now, I was free. Free to focus on my own life, my own goals, my own happiness. Free to spend my money on things I wanted instead of covering other people's obligations. Free to make plans without wondering whether I'd be needed to solve their latest crisis. Free to love my son without enabling his worst impulses. The phone rang while I was washing soil from my hands, and I saw Daniel's name on the screen. For a moment, I considered not answering. Our last conversation had ended badly, and I wasn't eager to repeat the experience. But curiosity won out, and I picked up the call. "Mom," Daniel said, and his voice was different somehow, smaller, more uncertain. "I was wondering if we could talk. Not about the insurance thing, just talk. Like we used to." The vulnerability in his tone caught me off guard. This wasn't the angry, defensive Daniel who'd left my apartment in a huff. This was someone who sounded genuinely lost. "Of course we can talk," I said, settling into my kitchen chair. "What's on your mind?" There was a long pause, long enough that I wondered if he was rethinking this conversation. "I miss you," he said finally. "I miss how easy things used to be between us. I miss feeling like I could call you with good news or bad news and know you'd be happy to hear from me." The honesty in his voice made my chest tight with emotion. "I miss that too," I admitted. "But Daniel, those easy times were built on me. Always being the one who gave while you were the one who received. That's not sustainable, and it's not healthy for either of us." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "I know we handled the insurance thing badly," he said. "I know we took advantage of your generosity. I know we should have been more responsible about paying you back." It was the first genuine acknowledgement of their behavior that I'd heard from him, and it felt like a small step toward honesty. "Thank you for saying that," I told him. "That means a lot to me." We talked for another 20 minutes, carefully avoiding the topics that had caused so much conflict. He told me about a promotion opportunity at work, and I shared news about my book club's latest selection. It wasn't the deep, meaningful conversation that would magically fix everything between us, but it was a start. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months when it came to Daniel. Hope. Not hope that things would go back to the way they used to be, because that dynamic had been unhealthy for both of us, but hope that we might eventually find a new way to be family, one built on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. The check was for $437.63, representing the prorated refund from the canceled policy. I stared at the amount for a long moment, calculating in my head. It was more than 2 months' worth of premiums, money that Daniel and Cassandra would have owed me anyway if they'd been keeping up with their reimbursements. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. I deposited the check that afternoon and used part of it to book a weekend trip to the mountains, something I'd been wanting to do for years but had never prioritized. The rest went into my savings account, a small buffer against future emergencies that actually belonged to me this time. It felt strange to spend money on myself without worrying about whether someone else might need it more. Tuesday brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson from down the hall, an elderly woman I'd spoken with occasionally in the laundry room, knocked on my door around 10 in the morning. "Margaret, dear," she said when I answered. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I've been hearing some concerning things about your family situation, and I wanted to check on you. I invited her in for coffee, curious about what she'd heard, and from whom. Mrs. Patterson was in her 80s, sharp as a tack, and had lived in the building longer than anyone else. She had a way of knowing everything that happened within a 5-block radius without ever seeming to gossip deliberately. "Your daughter-in-law came by yesterday," she said, settling into my kitchen chair with her coffee cup. "She was asking questions about you, about your finances, about whether you seemed lonely or depressed lately." The conversation suddenly took on a more serious tone. "She seemed very interested in whether you'd been acting erratically or making impulsive decisions." A chill ran down my spine. Cassandra had been gathering information about my mental state, my behavior, my decision-making capacity. The implications were deeply unsettling. "What exactly did she ask?" I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Patterson frowned. "She wanted to know if you'd been forgetting things, if you seemed confused about money matters, if you'd been isolating yourself from family. She kept mentioning how worried they were about you, how sudden this insurance cancellation had been." The older woman leaned forward slightly. "Margaret, I've known you for 3 years. You're one of the most sensible, level-headed people in this building. Whatever's going on with your family, it's not because you're losing your mental faculties." The relief I felt at her words surprised me. I hadn't realized how much Cassandra's questioning might have shaken my confidence in my own judgment. "Thank you for telling me this," I said. "And thank you for your confidence in my mental state. The insurance situation is exactly what it appears to be. They stopped paying me back, so I stopped paying for them." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's what I figured. But dear, you should know that she asked specifically about your finances, about whether you might be having money troubles that were affecting your judgment. She seemed very interested in whether you had power of attorney arrangements or family members who helped you with financial decisions." The conversation was becoming more alarming by the minute. Cassandra wasn't just trying to understand my decision or gather sympathy for their situation. She was building a case for my incompetence, laying groundwork for some kind of intervention or challenge to my autonomy. The audacity was breathtaking, but the potential consequences were serious. "Did she ask you to document any of these observations?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "No, but she did ask if I'd be willing to talk to other family members if they had concerns about your well-being. She made it sound like they were considering some kind of family meeting or intervention." The manipulation was more sophisticated than I'd given Cassandra credit for. She was trying to create a paper trail of concern about my mental state, probably hoping to use it to pressure me back into subsidizing their lifestyle. After Mrs. Patterson left, I called my bank and spoke with my personal banker, a woman named Sandra who'd handled my accounts for several years. "I need to make sure my accounts are properly secured," I explained. "I'm concerned that family members might try to claim I'm not competent to manage my own finances." Sandra's voice became immediately professional and reassuring. "We can absolutely help you with that. Do you want to set up a flag on your accounts that requires additional verification for any changes? We can also document your current mental state and decision-making capacity if you're concerned about future challenges." We spent an hour on the phone reviewing my account security, updating my contact preferences, and documenting my clear, coherent reasons for recent financial decisions. Sandra scheduled a face-to-face meeting for the following week, where we'd review everything in person and create a written record of my competency and autonomous decision-making. "Mrs. Dawson," Sandra said as we wrapped up the call, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've seen elder financial abuse take many forms. What you're describing sounds like classic groundwork for a competency challenge. You're being very smart to protect yourself proactively." That afternoon, I called my lawyer, Harold Brennan, who'd handled my will and estate planning after Robert died. Harold was in his 60s, methodical and thorough, with a reputation for protecting his clients from family drama. "Harold," I said, I need to update my estate documents and possibly explore legal protections against family interference in my financial decisions. Harold listened without interruption as I explained the insurance situation, Cassandra's information gathering, and my concerns about potential competency challenges. "Margaret," he said when I finished, "what you're describing is a textbook setup for elder manipulation. They're trying to create a narrative that your decision was irrational or evidence of declining mental capacity." We scheduled a meeting for Thursday morning to review and update my legal documents. Harold suggested creating a revocable trust. That would provide additional protection for my assets, while clearly documenting my mental competency and decision-making rationale. The goal is to make it very expensive and very difficult for anyone to challenge your autonomy, he explained. Wednesday evening brought another phone call from Daniel, but this time his tone was different. More formal, more careful. "Mom, Cassandra and I have been talking, and we're really concerned about you. Some of your recent decisions seem out of character, and we're wondering if you've been feeling overwhelmed or confused about things." The concern trolling was so transparent it was almost insulting. "What decisions seem out of character to you?" I asked evenly. Daniel paused, probably consulting notes or coaching from Cassandra. "Well, the insurance thing was so sudden, and Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you seemed agitated when she talked to you yesterday. We're just worried that maybe you're under some kind of stress that's affecting your judgment." Mrs. Patterson had said no such thing about me seeming agitated, which meant either Daniel was lying or Cassandra was. "Daniel," I said slowly, "let me be very clear about something. I am 74 years old, not 94. I am in excellent mental and physical health. I made a rational decision to stop paying bills for people who weren't reimbursing me. There is nothing confused, impulsive, or concerning about that decision." "But Mom," he pressed, "it just seems like such a drastic step. Maybe we could all sit down together and talk about ways to make the insurance arrangement work better for everyone." The suggestion sounded reasonable on the surface, but I recognized it for what it was. An attempt to get me into a situation where multiple people could observe and potentially document my supposedly declining mental state. "There's nothing to discuss," I told him firmly. "You handle your own insurance, I'll handle mine. That's how adult relationships work." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Mom, we love you, and we just want to make sure you're okay. Maybe it would help if you talked to someone, like a counselor or a doctor, just to make sure you're processing everything in a healthy way." The suggestion that I needed professional help for making a reasonable financial decision was the final straw. "Daniel," I said, "I'm going to hang up now. When you're ready to treat me like a competent adult instead of like a confused elderly woman who needs managing, you can call me back." I ended the call without waiting for his response. Thursday morning's meeting with Harold was both enlightening and disturbing. As we reviewed my legal documents, he explained exactly what Daniel and Cassandra might be attempting. If they can, establish a pattern of allegedly irrational financial decisions, they could petition for guardianship or conservatorship, he said. "It's a long shot, given your obvious competency, but the process itself can be expensive and emotionally devastating." We spent 3 hours updating my will, creating a revocable trust, and drafting a detailed mental competency affidavit that documented my clear reasoning for recent financial decisions. Harold also prepared a cease and desist letter that we could send if the information gathering and competency questioning continued. "The trust protects your assets, even if someone manages to get a temporary conservatorship order," Harold explained. "And the competency affidavit, sworn before a notary while you're clearly of sound mind, makes it much harder for them to claim you were confused or manipulated." He leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, in 40 years of practice, I've learned that family members who genuinely care about an elderly relative's well-being don't go around gathering evidence of incompetence. They have direct conversations about their concerns. That afternoon, I received a call from someone identifying herself as a social worker with the county's Adult Protective Services. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, "we've received a report expressing concern about your well-being. I'd like to schedule a time to visit with you and make sure you're safe and receiving appropriate support." My heart sank. Someone had actually filed an official report claiming I was vulnerable or at risk. What kind of concerns were reported? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. The social worker, whose name was Linda Freeman, spoke carefully. "The report suggests that you may be experiencing confusion about financial matters and making decisions that aren't in your best interest. The reporting party expressed concern that you might be isolating yourself from family support." I scheduled the visit for the following Tuesday, giving myself time to prepare. That evening, I called Harold to inform him about the social services contact. "This escalates things significantly," he said. "But don't worry, you're clearly competent. You have documentation of your decision-making process, and you have legal representation. Just be honest and straightforward with the social worker." Friday brought a surprise visit from Victoria, Cassandra's sister. I was working in my garden plot when she approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, "I hope you don't mind me tracking you down here. I wanted to talk to you away from Cassandra and Daniel." I straightened up, brushing soil from my hands. Victoria had been part of the family dynamics that led to my exclusion from Easter, but her expression suggested this wasn't a hostile encounter. "What can I do for you?" I asked neutrally. "I need to tell you something," she said, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. "Cassandra has been planning this whole incompetency thing for weeks. She's been calling family members, neighbors, anyone who might know you, trying to get them to say you've been acting strangely." Victoria's voice was troubled. "She thinks if she can get you declared incompetent, you'll have to reinstate the insurance and maybe even help them with their mortgage payments." The confirmation of my suspicions was somehow both relieving and infuriating. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "Because it's wrong. I've been staying with them for months, and I've seen how they treat you. They take advantage of your generosity, then act like victims when you set boundaries. What Cassandra's doing now is just vindictive." She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message thread. "This is from last week," she said. "Cassandra, asking me to call the social services people and report that I'd observed you acting confused and agitated." The messages were detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. According to Cassandra's coaching, I'd allegedly been forgetting conversations, repeating myself, becoming angry when questioned about financial decisions. "I didn't make the call," Victoria said quickly, "but I think she found someone who did, probably one of Daniel's friends who doesn't really know you but trusts his version of events." She put her phone away. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm really sorry about all of this. And I'm sorry about Easter. That wasn't about space constraints. That was about Cassandra wanting to show you that she could exclude you whenever she wanted." The honesty was refreshing after weeks of manipulation and gaslighting. "Thank you for telling me," I said, "and thank you for not participating in the false reports." Victoria nodded. "I'm moving out next week. I can't stand watching them destroy their relationship with you over money and control issues. Daniel used to talk about you all the time, about how proud he was to be your son. Now he barely mentions you except to complain about your unreasonable expectations." After Victoria left, I sat on the bench next to my garden plot and tried to process everything I'd learned. My son and daughter-in-law weren't just trying to guilt-trip me back into subsidizing their lifestyle. They were actively working to have me declared mentally incompetent, presumably so they could regain control over my financial decisions. The betrayal was so profound, so calculating, that I felt physically sick. That evening, I called my sister Anne in Phoenix. Anne was 3 years older than me, a retired school principal with a sharp mind and no tolerance for nonsense. We'd always been close, talking at least once a week since Robert died. "Anne," I said when she answered, "I need to ask you something important. Have you received any calls from Daniel or anyone else asking about my mental state or behavior?" "As a matter of fact, I have," Anne said immediately. "Daniel called last week asking if I'd noticed you becoming forgetful or making impulsive decisions. He said they were worried about you living alone and managing your finances." Her voice sharpened. "Margaret, what's going on? Are you having health problems you haven't told me about?" I spent the next hour explaining the entire situation, from the insurance arrangement to the missed payments to the Easter exclusion to the current incompetency campaign. Anne listened without interruption, occasionally making disgusted sounds at particularly egregious details. "Margaret," she said when I finished, "that boy has turned into someone I don't recognize. And that wife of his is a piece of work." "What did you tell Daniel when he called?" I asked. Anne snorted. "I told him he was out of his mind. I told him you were sharper than people half your age, and that if he was worried about your decision-making, maybe he should look at his own choices first." She paused. "But Margaret, this is serious. If they're filing false reports with social services, that's a form of harassment. You need to protect yourself legally." Saturday morning, I drove to the public library and spent several hours researching elder abuse laws, incompetency proceedings, and legal protections for seniors. What I learned was both reassuring and troubling. While it would be very difficult for Daniel and Cassandra to succeed in having me declared incompetent, the process itself could be lengthy, expensive, and invasive. More concerning was the discovery that Adult Protective Services investigations, even when ultimately unfounded, created permanent records that could be accessed in future proceedings. Simply having been investigated could be used as evidence of questionable mental capacity, regardless of the investigation's outcome. Sunday afternoon brought a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. "Margaret," she said, "I had a very strange conversation yesterday with a young man who said he was your son. He was asking if I'd noticed you acting confused or upset lately. I told him you seemed perfectly fine to me, but the conversation left me feeling uneasy." The information gathering was continuing, despite my clear communication that I found it inappropriate and invasive. "Mrs. Chen," I said, "if anyone else contacts you asking about my mental state or behavior, would you mind telling them you don't feel comfortable discussing your neighbors with strangers? And maybe let me know if it happens again?" "Of course, dear," she said. "But Margaret, are you in some kind of trouble? This all seems very suspicious to me." I assured her that I was fine and handling the situation appropriately, but her concern reminded me how this campaign must look to outside observers. Even people who knew me well were starting to wonder if there might be some truth to the concerns being raised. Monday morning, I called Linda Freeman, the social worker, to confirm our Tuesday meeting and ask about the specifics of the report that had been filed. "I can't share details about the reporting party," she said, "but I can tell you that the concerns raised include alleged financial confusion, social isolation, and possible depression following a recent family conflict." "Ms. Freeman," I said, "I want you to know that I'm represented by legal counsel, and I believe this report was filed maliciously by family members who are upset that I stopped subsidizing their expenses. I'm fully competent and capable of managing my own affairs." Linda's tone became more careful. "I appreciate you letting me know about the legal representation, Mrs. Dawson. Our goal is simply to ensure your safety and well-being. If the concerns are unfounded, our investigation will conclude quickly." That afternoon, Harold called with updates on the legal protections we'd discussed. "I've finalized all your documents," he said. "The trust is established, the competency affidavit is notarized, and I've prepared a comprehensive file documenting your mental acuity and rational decision-making process." He paused. "Margaret, I also want you to know that if the social services investigation finds any evidence of false reporting, we can pursue charges for elder abuse and harassment. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared for the social worker's visit. I'd laid out all my financial documents, legal papers, and evidence of Daniel and Cassandra's behavior. My apartment was spotless, my appearance was professional, and my documentation was thorough. If Linda Freeman was going to evaluate my competency, she'd find overwhelming evidence of my mental clarity and organizational skills. Linda arrived precisely on time, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She spent 2 hours with me, reviewing my living situation, my financial management, my social connections, and my decision-making process regarding the insurance cancellation. I was careful to be factual rather than emotional, presenting documentation rather than defensiveness. "Mrs. Dawson," Linda said as she prepared to leave, "I want to be clear about something. Based on my observations and our conversation, I see no evidence of mental confusion, financial exploitation, or concerning isolation. You appear to be managing your affairs competently and making rational decisions based on legitimate concerns about family members taking advantage of your generosity." The relief was overwhelming. "What happens next?" I asked. Linda packed her paperwork into her briefcase. "I'll file a report stating that the concerns raised in the initial complaint appear to be unfounded. The case will be closed unless new, substantive evidence emerges." She hesitated. "Off the record, Mrs. Dawson, I've been doing this job for 12 years. What you've described sounds like family members who are unhappy with your financial boundaries and are trying to use the system to pressure you into compliance." After Linda left, I called Harold to report on the meeting. "Excellent," he said. "Now we wait for her official report, and if anyone files additional false complaints, we have grounds for harassment charges." I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The investigation that had seemed so threatening was actually working in my favor, creating an official record of my competency and the malicious nature of the reports against me. Wednesday brought a text message from Daniel that made my blood boil. "Mom, the social worker said she talked to you yesterday. We're so glad you're getting the support you need. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help during this difficult time." The false concern, the implication that I was receiving support for mental health issues, the continued manipulation even after their plan had failed, was infuriating. I forwarded the text to Harold with a note asking if this constituted additional harassment. His response was swift and decisive. "Yes. This is an attempt to create the impression that you're receiving mental health services, which could be used in future proceedings. I'm sending the cease and desist letter today." Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Patricia at the insurance company. "Margaret," she said, "I wanted to give you a heads up about something unusual. We received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your son, asking about your recent policy cancellation. He was inquiring about whether we had any concerns about your mental capacity when you made the cancellation decision." The audacity was breathtaking. Not content with harassing my neighbors and filing false reports with social services, they were now trying to get my insurance company to question my mental competency. "What did you tell them?" I asked. Patricia's voice was dry with amusement. "I told them that insurance companies don't make mental health assessments and that their question was inappropriate and potentially discriminatory. I also told them that our conversation with you was completely professional and that you demonstrated full understanding of the cancellation process and its implications." Friday morning brought Harold's call confirming that the cease and desist letter had been delivered to Daniel and Cassandra. By certified mail, the letter makes it clear that any further attempts to question your mental capacity, gather information about your competency, or file false reports will result in immediate legal action, he said. It also demands that they stop contacting your neighbors, service providers, and family members with inquiries about your mental state. That afternoon, Daniel called me for the first time since receiving the letter. His voice was tight with anger and barely controlled frustration. "Mom, we just got a letter from your lawyer. This is getting completely out of hand. We're family. We're just concerned about you." The false wounded tone was familiar, but now it was undercut by the knowledge of exactly what they'd been doing, behind my back. "Daniel," I said calmly, "you and Cassandra have spent weeks trying to have me declared mentally incompetent because I stopped paying your bills. You've harassed my neighbors, filed false reports with social services, and contacted my business associates with questions about my mental capacity. That's not concern. That's elder abuse." "That's not what we were doing," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "We were just trying to understand why you were making such drastic decisions. We thought maybe you were depressed or overwhelmed." The gaslighting continued even in the face of documented evidence of their campaign against me. "The cease and desist letter is very clear," I told him. "No more questioning my mental state, no more gathering information about my competency, no more false reports. If you have legitimate concerns about my well-being, you can express them directly to me like an adult." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Fine," he said finally. "But don't expect us to just pretend everything is normal between us after you've involved lawyers and made this into some kind of legal battle." The threat was supposed to make me feel guilty, supposed to make me choose between legal protection and family relationships. "Daniel," I said sadly, "there's nothing normal about adult children trying to have their parent declared incompetent for setting financial boundaries. You made this into a legal battle the moment you decided to attack my mental capacity instead of respecting my decisions." I hung up before he could respond, feeling exhausted by the conversation, but relieved that the legal boundaries were now in place. Saturday morning brought a knock on my door from Victoria, who was moving out of Daniel and Cassandra's house that day. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, "I wanted to stop by before I left town. I think you should know that they're not giving up on this. Cassandra is furious about the lawyer letter, and she's talking about finding other ways to pressure you." "What kind of other ways?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. Victoria looked uncomfortable. "She's been researching your finances online, trying to figure out what assets you have and whether there are other ways to access them. She's also talking about having Daniel claim that you promised to help them with their mortgage payments and that you're breaking your word." The information was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. People who would file false incompetency reports weren't likely to be deterred by a single cease and desist letter. "Victoria," I said, "thank you for continuing to keep me informed. I hope you find a good living situation and can put this whole mess behind you." "I will," she said. "And Mrs. Dawson, for what it's worth, I think you're handling this exactly right." Daniel used to be a good person, but something about home ownership and financial pressure has brought out the worst in him. Maybe hitting rock bottom will help him remember who he used to be. After Victoria left, I spent the weekend updating my security measures. I changed my online banking passwords, set up additional account alerts, and reviewed all my financial statements for any unusual activity. I also installed a security camera by my front door and updated my emergency contact information to include Harold's office number. Monday morning brought the call I'd been dreading. Mark from the mortgage company, with news about Daniel and Cassandra's payment situation. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "I'm calling because the borrowers listed you as an emergency contact when they originally applied for the loan. They're now 3 months behind on their mortgage payments, and we're beginning the foreclosure process." 3 months behind. While they'd been spending weeks trying to manipulate me back into paying their insurance, they'd been falling further and further behind on their actual mortgage. The irony was bitter. All their energy had gone into trying to control my decisions, instead of addressing their real financial problems. "I'm no longer involved in their financial affairs," I told Mark. "You'll need to work directly with them on any payment arrangements or alternatives." Mark's voice was sympathetic but professional. I understand. I just wanted to give you advance notice since foreclosure proceedings will begin next week. If they were hoping for family assistance to bring the loan current, time is running out. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring out the window at the spring afternoon. Daniel and Cassandra were about to lose their house, the house I'd helped them buy, the house I'd been protecting with insurance they couldn't be bothered to pay for. Part of me felt guilty for not stepping in to help, for not offering to bring their mortgage current. But a larger part of me recognized that this crisis was the inevitable result of their financial mismanagement and poor priorities. They'd had months to address their mortgage problems, but instead they'd focused on bathroom renovations and campaigns to control my decisions. They'd created this situation through their own choices, and they needed to face the consequences of those choices. That evening, I called Anne to update her on the situation. 3 months behind on their mortgage, she repeated incredulously. While they were busy trying to get you declared incompetent for not paying their insurance. Margaret, these people have completely lost touch with reality. Anne's voice was sharp with anger. Are you going to help them? No, I said, surprised by how clear and certain my answer was. They made their choices. They prioritized attacking my mental capacity. Over addressing their real problems, they can figure out their own solution. Anne was quiet for a moment. Good for you, she said finally. It's about time someone in this family faced the consequences of their actions. Tuesday brought a final, desperate phone call from Cassandra. Her voice was shaky, tearful, completely different from the confident manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Margaret, please. I know we've handled everything badly. I know we've hurt you and disrespected you. But we're going to lose the house. We're going to lose everything. Cassandra, I said gently, losing a house isn't the end of the world. Millions of people rent instead of own, and they live perfectly happy lives. Maybe downsizing to something more affordable would actually reduce your financial stress. Cassandra's sob was audible through the phone. But this is our home. We've put so much work into it, so much money. Money you didn't have, I pointed out. You've been behind on your mortgage for months while worrying about bathroom renovations and insurance payments. Your priorities have been backwards from the beginning. Cassandra was quiet for a moment, perhaps finally recognizing the truth in what I was saying. What can we do to fix this? She asked, and her voice was small, defeated. How can we make things right with you? It was the first time she'd asked what she could do for me instead of demanding what I should do for them. You can start by treating me like a person instead of like a resource, I said. You can stop trying to manipulate and control me. You can take responsibility for your own decisions and their consequences. We will, Cassandra said quickly. We'll do better. We'll pay you back everything we owe. We'll treat you with respect. Just please, help us save the house. But the promise felt hollow, desperate, like something she'd say to get through the immediate crisis without any real commitment to change. Cassandra, I said sadly, you've spent weeks trying to have me declared mentally incompetent because I stopped paying your bills. That's not the kind of behavior that gets fixed with promises. That's the kind of behavior that shows who someone really is when they're under pressure. I paused. I hope you and Daniel find a solution to your housing situation. But that solution isn't going to involve my money or my credit. We hung up without any dramatic declarations or angry words. Just the quiet acknowledgement that our relationship had reached a point where trust could not be easily rebuilt. I felt sad for the family we might have been, but relieved to finally be free of the manipulation and financial exploitation that had characterized our interactions for months. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. Tomorrow, Daniel and Cassandra would continue dealing with their financial crisis. They'd make decisions about their house, their future, their priorities, but for the first time in months, none of those decisions would involve my money, my stress, or my emotional energy. I was free to focus on my own life, my own goals, my own happiness. Free to spend my retirement years as I chose, with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Free to love my son from a distance while protecting myself from his worst impulses. The sun disappeared behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, peaceful, and entirely my own to enjoy. Wednesday morning arrived with an unusual silence. No phone calls, no angry texts, no desperate voicemails. For the first time in weeks, my phone remained quiet throughout my morning coffee and newspaper routine. The absence of drama felt almost surreal after the constant barrage of manipulation, attempts and crisis calls that had become my daily reality. I spent the morning tending to my garden plot, enjoying the simple pleasure of working with soil and seeds without the weight of other people's financial emergencies pressing on my consciousness. The tomato plants I'd started from seedlings were thriving, their green leaves reaching toward the spring sunshine with the kind of uncomplicated determination I admired. Around noon, Mrs. Chen appeared at the garden fence, holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "Margaret, dear," she called. "Out. I made too much beef stew yesterday. Would you like some for lunch?" Her kindness was such a contrast to the calculated manipulation I'd been enduring that I felt my eyes well up with unexpected tears. We sat on the bench beside my garden plot, sharing her delicious stew and talking about simple things. Her grandson's upcoming graduation, the new couple who'd moved into apartment 4B, the community center's plan to expand the garden plots next season. Normal conversation between people who genuinely cared about each other's well-being without any hidden agendas or financial motivations. Thursday brought unexpected news from Patricia at the insurance company. "Margaret," she said, "I wanted to follow up on something that came up in our system. It appears that Daniel and Cassandra never actually secured replacement insurance coverage after we canceled their policy. The implications hit me immediately. Their house had been uninsured for 3 weeks while they focused on trying to manipulate me instead of solving their actual problem. The mortgage company has been sending increasingly urgent notices about the insurance lapse," Patricia continued. "They'll be placing force-placed insurance on the property soon, which typically costs 3 to 4 times more than standard coverage." I thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling a familiar knot of worry that I quickly dismissed. Their insurance situation was no longer my responsibility. Friday brought the call I'd been expecting. Mark from the mortgage company, with news that would change everything for Daniel and Cassandra. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "I'm calling to inform you that we've placed force-placed insurance on the Maple Heights property due to continued coverage gaps. The monthly cost is $947, which brings their total monthly mortgage obligation to over $3,000. $3,000 a month for a couple who had been struggling to cover $1,800. The mathematics of their situation were now impossible. Additionally," Mark continued, "the borrowers are now 4 months behind on their regular mortgage payments. Unless they can bring the account current within 30 days, we'll be proceeding with foreclosure." "Mr. Hendricks," I said, "I want to be clear that I'm no longer involved in their financial affairs. I can't provide assistance or guarantees for their obligations." Mark's response was understanding but professional. He was only calling because I'd been listed as an emergency contact. The following Tuesday brought an unexpected knock on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel, standing in the hallway, but he looked different. Thinner, more haggard, with the defeated posture of someone who'd exhausted all their options. I opened the door but remained standing in the doorway. "Mom," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" There was no anger in his tone, no manipulation, just exhaustion and what sounded like genuine desperation. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him in. Daniel sat heavily on my couch, his head in his hands. "We're going to lose everything," he said without looking up. The house, our credit, probably my job. I don't know what to do anymore. The admission was so stark, so devoid of his usual attempts at manipulation, that I found myself sitting down across from him. "Daniel," I said gently, "what happened to your savings? Surely you have some resources to work with." Daniel's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "Our savings account has been empty for months. We've been using credit cards to cover basic expenses since January. The GoFundMe money was frozen when the page got reported for fraud." The financial picture he painted was even worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just behind on their mortgage and struggling with insurance costs. They were drowning in credit card debt, facing potential job loss, and had no remaining assets to liquidate. "How did it get this bad?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "I made bad decisions," Daniel said, finally looking up at me. "I borrowed money for the business venture without telling Cassandra how risky it was. When that failed, I tried to cover the losses with credit cards. Then, when you stopped paying the insurance, instead of just getting our own policy, I convinced myself that you were the problem and that fixing our relationship with you would solve everything." The honesty was startling after months of manipulation and blame shifting. "I spent all this time trying to make you responsible for our financial problems instead of actually addressing the financial problems," he continued. "I know how crazy that sounds now, but I was so desperate to avoid facing the reality of what I'd done." I felt a complex mix of emotions listening to his confession. Relief that he was finally being honest, sadness for the situation he'd created, and a lingering anger about the months of manipulation and attacks on my mental competency. "Daniel," I said carefully, "I appreciate your honesty. But you and Cassandra didn't just ask for help. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent when I set financial boundaries." Daniel's face crumpled with what appeared to be genuine shame. "I know. That was Cassandra's idea, but I went along with it. I was so desperate to find a solution that didn't require me to admit how badly I'd screwed up." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I probably destroyed any chance of having a real relationship with you, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did was wrong." The conversation continued for another hour, with Daniel providing details about their financial situation and his growing recognition of how his choices had created their crisis. There were no requests for money, no manipulation attempts, no blame shifting, just a broken man acknowledging the consequences of his decisions. "What are you going to do now?" I asked as our conversation wound down. Daniel shrugged, a gesture that reminded me of the uncertain teenager he'd once been. "Probably file for bankruptcy. Try to negotiate a short sale of the house if the mortgage company will work with us. Start over somewhere we can afford." As Daniel prepared to leave, he turned back to me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to want a relationship with someone who treated you the way I did. But I want you to know that I remember who you used to be to me, and I remember who I used to be to you. I'm sorry I let our problems become your fault in my mind." After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, processing the conversation and my conflicting emotions. Part of me felt vindicated by his admission of wrongdoing and acknowledgement of my innocence in their financial crisis. Part of me felt sad for the relationship we'd lost and the trust that had been broken. But mostly, I felt a deep sense of peace about my decision to maintain boundaries despite the pressure and manipulation. Daniel's honesty was valuable, but it came only after his other tactics had failed and his situation had become hopeless. If I'd given in to his earlier demands, I would have been enabling the same irresponsible behavior while delaying his recognition of the real problems. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Mark at the mortgage company, informing me that Daniel and Cassandra had agreed to a short sale of their house rather than proceeding through foreclosure. "The process will take several months," he explained, "but it should allow them to avoid the most severe credit consequences of foreclosure." The short sale meant they would lose their house, but escape the crushing debt that had been accumulating through missed payments and forced insurance costs. It was a difficult solution, but probably the best outcome available given their financial situation. They also asked me to thank you for not interfering with their decision, Mark added. Apparently, there was some concern that family members might try to complicate the short sale process. The thanks were ironic, given that they'd spent months trying to force my interference in their financial decisions. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a local newspaper reporter who had heard about my situation through the Adult Protective Services investigation. She was writing an article about elder financial abuse and wanted to include my story as an example of successful resistance to manipulation. Your case illustrates several important points, the reporter explained. The gradual escalation from requests for help to demands for support, the use of family loyalty as emotional leverage, and the attempt to question mental capacity when other manipulation fails. I agreed to participate, hoping my experience might help other seniors recognize similar warning signs. A month later, the article was published with the headline, "Local Senior Fights Back Against Financial Manipulation." Reading my story in print was surreal, seeing the manipulation tactics and legal responses laid out in clear, objective language. The article was educational rather than sensational, focusing on warning signs and protection strategies rather than personal drama. I received several phone calls from readers of the article. Other seniors who recognized similar patterns in their own families, adult children who realized they might be inadvertently manipulating elderly parents, and social workers who wanted to share the article with their clients. One call was particularly meaningful from an elderly man whose adult daughter had been pressuring him to add her name to his accounts. Your story helped me realize that her urgency wasn't about protecting me, he said. It was about accessing my money. Spring turned to summer, and I established a peaceful routine that felt entirely my own. Garden work in the mornings, reading in the afternoons, occasional dinners with Mrs. Chen and other neighbors who'd become genuine friends. I used the insurance refund money to take a weekend trip to the mountains, something I'd been wanting to do for years but had never prioritized. In August, I received a brief email from Daniel. No requests for money, no manipulation, just an update on their situation. They'd completed the short sale and moved to a small apartment across town. He'd kept his job and they were working with a financial counselor to address their debt. I know we don't have a relationship anymore, he wrote, but I wanted you to know that we're taking responsibility for our mistakes and trying to build something sustainable. The email was neither an apology nor a request for reconciliation. It was simply information from one adult to another, the kind of communication that might eventually form the foundation for a healthier relationship. I didn't respond immediately, but I saved the message, recognizing it as a possible first step towards something better. By autumn, the whole crisis felt like a distant memory. The legal protections Harold had helped me establish remained in place, but they no longer felt necessary. The social services investigation had been officially closed, with findings that supported my competency and documented the malicious nature of the original complaints. I spent my 65th birthday quietly, with a small celebration at Mrs. Chen's apartment and cards from neighbors who'd become dear friends. No drama, no family conflicts, no financial crises to manage. Just the peaceful enjoyment of a life I'd worked decades to build and finally felt free to enjoy. Looking back on that Easter exclusion that had started everything, I realized it had been a gift in disguise. Being told I wasn't immediate family had forced me to examine what family really meant and what I was willing to accept in the name of love. I'd learned that real love requires mutual respect, that generosity without boundaries becomes enabling, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own choices. The insurance cancellation had been more than a financial decision. It had been a declaration of independence, A statement that my money and my life belonged to me, not to anyone who claimed family ties as justification for exploitation. The months of manipulation and attacks that followed had only confirmed the wisdom of that choice. 6 months after the Easter dinner I'd been excluded from, I hosted my own small holiday gathering. Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Patterson, and 2 other neighbors joined me for a simple meal and genuine conversation. We talked about books, gardens, current, events, and shared memories. No one asked me for money, questioned my mental capacity, or treated me as anything other than an interesting person whose company they enjoyed. As we cleared dishes and shared dessert, I thought about how much richer this gathering felt than those awkward family dinners where I'd walked on eggshells around Cassandra's moods and Daniel's financial stress. These people chose to spend time with me because they valued my friendship, not because they hoped I might solve their problems. That evening, after my guests had gone home, I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset and feeling profound gratitude for the difficult lessons this experience had taught me. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand respect, to recognize manipulation when it was disguised as concern, and to prioritize my own well-being without guilt or apology. The woman who had been excluded from Easter dinner because she wasn't immediate family had discovered that she didn't need their validation or inclusion to live a fulfilling life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to let them face the reality of their own decisions without rushing in to shield them from the consequences. I never did find out exactly how Daniel and Cassandra's story ended. Whether they learned from their mistakes, whether they rebuilt their relationship on healthier foundations, whether they ever truly understood the damage their manipulation had caused. But I'd learned something more important. Their story was no longer mine to worry about or fix. My story was about a woman who'd spent decades putting other people's needs before her own, who'd confused enabling with love and boundaries with selfishness. It was about learning at 64 years old that I had the right to live my own life according to my own values and priorities. The insurance policy I'd canceled had protected their house from fire, flood, and theft. But canceling it had protected something far more valuable. It had protected my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to be treated with respect by the people who claimed to love me. As I headed inside for the evening, I felt nothing but peace about the choices I'd made and the boundaries I'd established. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new opportunities to enjoy the retirement I'd worked so hard to achieve. And for the first time in years, those possibilities belonged entirely to me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.